Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a build tutorial on the Shendrones Mako frame. It's a beautiful racing frame, very aerodynamic. It comes with a 3D printed TPU canopy, which should withstand any crashes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to feed the strap in the front, because the strap's going to be sitting underneath the power distribution board, and you won't be able to access it once you have the power distribution board mounted. So let's get our strap. So once we have our strap installed, next thing to do is to install the power distribution board. I'm going to be using 4 of these green aluminum bolts and some nylon nuts, and then the power distribution board is going to be sitting on top of that. So just feed in the bolts, put on the nuts. Okay, once that's done, we can install our power distribution board. Now that we got the power distribution board on, as you can see, I already soldered on some wires that will be needed in the build. So next thing to do is to get a tie strap. And tie strap the battery connection lead down. There's a hole right there that you run the zip tie through. This will remove tension on the solder leads when you do crash. So firmly tighten that. Next thing we can do is feed in the other strap. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get our ESCs. So this one is reversed. Normal, reversed. I pre-programmed these ESCs in BLHeli. They're running BLHeli 14.4. So it's all going to be sitting like so. So the first thing we should do is tin all the pads on all the ESCs. Okay, once that's done, let's get our frame. get our motors. We're going to be using the DYS Special Edition race motors. They're 2205, 2300 kV. So what we need to do is cut the motor wires to length. So figure out where you want to put your ESC. I believe I'm going to put it right there. Get your canopy and just make sure that you have enough clearance from the canopy. So it's going to go about right there. Cut it about there. Now do the same for all motors. So for the other side, I'm just going to line up these wires together, line up the motors together. Cut it about the same length. For the front, the distance might be a little different, so I'm going to grab another ESC, place it where I want it. Around there. Let's just check. No, the length's the same, so just cut the same length as the other ones. Okay, so now the next step is to solder all the motor wires to the ESCs. The motors with the black nuts are clockwise. The props are spinning clockwise. So these are going to be going on the ESCs that are in the normal direction. And the ones with the silver nuts are the propeller spinning counterclockwise, so that's going to be for a reverse direction. So let's get the wire strippers out. Twist these wires and tin them up, and then solder them to the ESCs. So I always start in the middle and then do each side. Get the tweezers. Check our solder joints. That's good. Now do that for the rest of the motors, and then we'll get on to the next step. Alright guys, so once all the motors have been soldered up to the ESCs, the next step is to mount the motors onto the frame. So we're going to use the bolts that were provided in the kit. Got to get our Loctite out. And our hex driver. So now that that's done, we can get our double-sided tape and put a piece of double-sided tape on the bottom of each ESC and fix it to the frame. Let's just double check to make sure that this canopy will fit. Yeah, we should be good. Alright, now that that's done, we can measure out our power and ground leads to each ESC and solder them directly onto the power distribution board. Right. So now we can cut these wires to length. I always like to cut a little bit extra just in case. Okay, now that we cut our wires to length, let's mount the canopy again. And she's looking good. I think we're going to start with the back wires. Alright, so the next thing we need to do in this build is to put the standoffs on for mounting the flight controller. Make sure those are nice and tight in there. Okay, now we get some rubber O-rings that we're going to put on top of the standoffs to eliminate vibration. Now let's dry fit the flight controller. Beautiful. Okay, let's remove the flight controller. So now we're going to be working on the camera setup. So we're using an HS1177 camera. I already connected this to a monitor and changed all the settings so it's optimized for FPV use. And our video transmitter, we're using the FX796T, which this canopy is made for. It basically just pushes into there, and you can change your channels with the push button right there. So if it's going to be sitting here, we're going to need to cut these wires to length. And they're going to be feeding underneath the flight controller through here and connecting right here on the power distribution board. So I'm going to give it some extra length. I'm going to cut it maybe over here somewhere. I'm going to be removing the 5-volt out because I'm not going to be using them. So I'm only going to need power and video signal. Put some of these to my second knife. Let's strip these and solder them on. And these wires up. up nicely. Now we're going to get on to the next step. Alright, the next step in our build is to get our micro Minimosd, which is flashed with MWOSD 1.6, and to wire this up to the power distribution board. So the first thing we're going to do strip back these wires a bit. So I already have this pre-wired to wire directly onto this power distribution board slash LC filter for the camera and the OSD. So we're gonna have to connect the ground and the signal over here. It's gonna be a tight squeeze. And then signal, power, ground, and then the RX and TX will connect later when we install the flight controller. Okay, so let's tin these wires. It's gonna be a little tricky. Okay, that's one. Nice. So the next thing to do is strip back the power, ground, and signal, which is going to the OSD. Let's get the length again. Okay. So let's pre-pin these. Shorten the wires a bit. Okay, that's good to go. So this is just going to sit on top of the flight controller with a piece of double-sided tape. So now the next thing to do is to install the flight controller. Okay, now that we have all that wired up, the OSD's installed, we can mount the flight controller. So just simply plug in the 5 volts to the flight controller, like so, and mount it on top. Get 4 nuts and screw it down. Actually, before we screw it down, what we're going to do is connect all the signal wires. So let's start with Actually, let's take this off. This is our telemetry cable. This needs to be placed underneath the flight controller because it plugs into the side of the flight controller right there. So just put that there. And mount it. Okay. Now we can install our cable wires. So the first one, number 1. I'm soldering these directly to the board because of the limited space that we have in this frame. So that's 10 wires. To the flight controller. Get it clear out. Shendrones Mako. Not more too. Number 3. Alright, now that we have that done, we can plug this into Clean Flight and calibrate the ESCs, and then we'll come back and finish it up. Okay, so now that we got Clean Flight on here and the motors and ESCs are configured, the next step is to mount the OSD to the top of the flight controller. I'm just going to use some double-sided tape for that. Once that's done, just tuck these wires in nicely. Okay, now we can go ahead and plug in the camera. Hook up the VBAT, which is going to be directly soldered as well. Tin these wires. Tin the pads. Okay. Okay, and we're back. So now we tighten down the flight controller. Alright, now that that's done, we can go ahead and install the video transmitter onto the canopy. So I put a piece of double-sided tape here and a piece of double-sided tape here on the connector. So we'll just peel this off. Peel that off. Line it up. Push it down nicely. There we go. So plug the camera back in. I'm going to put a dab of hot glue on this connector so this wire never comes out. Tuck all these wires away. Now we get the receiver. And we install the receiver. So the receiver is going to go on like so. So the first thing we need to do is remove it from this heat shrink and solder up these wires to the receiver. Alright. So brown is signal, red's power, black's ground. Let's get these stripped. Gentle with this because I don't want it. All right. Now we can tin this. We're only using the 3 bottom connectors. So it goes SBus, power, and ground. Let's get a little bit of solder on the SBus connector. Okay, let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, now that that is done, we can put the heat shrink on. Spin this up. Hot air gun out. Drill antennas. Okay, so now we can double-sided tape this on top, and hopefully everything fits. Let's unplug this camera and just give it a check. Okay. Damn, this is a tight build. It's going to be a tight fit. We should be okay. Alright, at this point, let's measure the antenna tubes. I'm going to give them a little bit extra. Okay, let's take it apart, clean it up in here. We have this wire. Run like that. Double-sided tape for this. Let's get a battery and plug it in. Make sure that receiver turns on. Okay. At this point, I'm also going to get my radio and bind it to the receiver, and then we'll come back. Okay, so what I ended up doing was just putting the receiver on top of the flight controller and then putting the OSD on top of that, and then the buzzer right on top. I had to remove the VTX to make it easier to put the canopy on. So now is the final assembly. So first thing to do is plug in the camera. Actually, let's remove the camera from this. Plug it in nicely. Now let's get some hot glue. Can't find the hot glue gun. Okay, so let's install the camera now. Just push it in there like so. Now let's get the VTX. Actually, let's get the antennas feeded through. That's one. That's two. And slowly lower it. Put the VTX in. One side's in. Now let's get this side on. Make sure all the wires are going through their designated holes. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. Okay. And that's it. Now we just need to bolt it down and we're good to go. Alright, so the assembly is complete and this is how it looks. Just going to wrap some tape around the ESCs to hold them into place more firmly. that's it. She's done. Now we can take her for a hover and then tune her. Hey guys, I'm here in the backyard with my Shendrones Mako, and we're going to take her for a hover test and see if she flies. It's a little bit windy today. And she flies. So now I'm gonna take her to the park, give her a tune, and hopefully she's ready for race day. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.